As we're recording this, Iran is once again in the middle of a conflict. Larger, harsher, and more dangerous than the ones before it. There are many reactions to what is unfolding. Some are cheering the foreign invasion. Some oppose it but speak of potential benefits. Many others fear yet another bloody chapter in a region that has already endured far too much loss. As a history podcast, we are not equipped to offer expert analysis on events that are still unfolding and deeply shaped by personal and political convictions. All we can do is hope for de-escalation and wish safety for the people of Iran, for the people of the region, and for all those caught in this vicious affair. By coincidence, this episode explores the early stages of a relationship between two countries that now find themselves at war. Unlike the current hostility, their story begins with cooperation and friendship. So with a heavy heart, we bring you this episode. Tehran, early afternoon, February 4th, 1949. Winter had settled over Tehran with a pale, cloudy sky, and the cold lingered in the streets with light snow falling from the sky. The young monarch, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, had spent the better part of the decade attempting to steady a throne inherited in turbulence. The war years had passed, foreign armies had withdrawn, and despite ADP's best efforts, the country had stayed united and intact. Yet just like the city's winter fog, the question of Iran's direction remained suspended in the air. On that afternoon, the Shah prepared for what was meant to be a dignified moment of celebration. His black limousine cut a deliberate path through the avenues leading toward the campus of the University of Tehran. The university stood not merely as an institution of learning, but as a symbol of modern statehood. During the reign of Reza Shah Pahlavi, the government took deliberate steps to unify and expand higher education. In the early 1930s, figures within the Iranian government and academic community began studying how to create a national university that could bring together fragmented colleges into a single comprehensive institution. Architects in Iran and Europe were involved in designing the campus, and by 1934, the Majlis had formally established the University of Tehran as the first modern university in the country, and the institution was inaugurated with faculties in fields such as medicine, law, science, and engineering. Through the years, the Faculty of Law had come to represent the monarchy's vision of Iran, a state shaped by codified statuses rather than ancient clerical authority. It was there that a ceremony awaited the young Shah. Students had gathered in neat rows. Professors in dark overcoats stood beneath the building's facade. Officials adjusted their collars and exchanged words of protocol. There, they awaited to celebrate the anniversary of the institution with Iran's highest-ranking official. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the limousine slowed and came to a halt. A palace guard opened the rear door. The Shah emerged into the light. He paused, only briefly, before walking toward the faculty steps, acknowledging the restrained applause with a composed nod. His stride was measured, unhurried, one of a confident leader. Near the front steps, a section had been reserved for members of the press. Cameras hung ready. Notebooks rested open in gloved hands. Among the cluster of journalists stood a man who had positioned himself carefully. He watched, intently, as the Shah approached, his distance shrinking with every deliberate step. When the monarch was only a few meters away from the faculty entrance, the photographer moved forward. At first, it seemed like he was trying to find a clearer frame. But instead of adjusting his lens, the man drew a small revolver from within his equipment. The first shot rang out with a violence that shattered the ceremony's composure. Gasps turned to screams. Guards reacted in confusion, some dropping instinctively to the ground rather than immediately shielding their sovereign. The attacker fired again, and again, and again in rapid succession. 5 shots were discharged in the space of seconds. One bullet tore through the Shah's lower lip and cheek, staining his collar with blood. Another struck near his shoulder. The assassin adjusted his aim towards the king's body. Then came a hollow click. The 6th round failed. Before the assailant could regain control of his weapon, officers lunged upon him. Blows were exchanged, a rifle fired at close range. Within moments, the assassin lay wounded on the university grounds. The Shah, though injured and bleeding, remained conscious, eyes open toward the sky. Winter had settled over Tehran, with snow falling down from the sky. Hi, my name is Oriana, and you're listening to Lion and the Sun, a modern history of Iran. Within hours of the attack, martial law was declared in Tehran. An emergency session of the Majlis convened under the shadow of what was described as a coordinated assault on the state. Authorities spoke of communist agitation and religious extremism converging against the throne. Arrests began that very night. Hundreds were detained. Offices were sealed. Newspapers fell silent under tightened censorship. But despite the chaos, one fact remained clear. The Shah was alive. A bullet had pierced his lower lip and cheek, and another struck near his shoulder. The wounds were visible, but not mortal. Conscious and speaking, he was rushed to a hospital in Tehran, where surgeons worked quickly to treat the facial injury and tend to the shoulder wound. Around 7 o'clock, from his hospital room, the Shah addressed the nation by radio. His voice, steady but strained, thanked the public for its concern and framed the day not as a moment of weakness, but as an endured test. Newspapers soon printed photographs of him in a hospital gown, cheek bandaged, eyes alert. Messages of sympathy arrived from abroad, including one from Harry S. Truman, underscoring that what had transpired in a university courtyard was no mere domestic disturbance. The Shah had already earned public support for the way he handled the Azerbaijan crisis. But now, the image of a wounded yet unbroken monarch sent his popularity soaring. Messages of support poured in. Political factions that had spent years attacking one another suddenly stood behind the crown. Even the clergy moved closer to the throne. Ayatollah Boroujerdi, one of the most influential religious figures of the time, wrote a firm letter of support, praying, "May God Almighty preserve his kingdom." For a brief moment, the tension that had defined the relationship between Reza Shah and the religious establishment seemed distant. Whatever friction had existed in the father's era, the son had, at least for now, softened it. The man identified as the assailant was Nasser Fakhr Adai, an Iranian who had obtained a press credential allowing him to stand among reporters and photographers. Reports described him as someone whose connections brushed both radical Islamist circles and individuals linked to the Tudeh Party. Fakhr Adai had not acted on impulse. He had been planning the assassination for years. He had tried at least twice before to get close enough to the Shah, but failed to find the right moment. until the Shah's visit to Tehran University. Later, investigations indicated that the revolver he had used reportedly been supplied by a childhood friend with stronger militant ties to Tudeh. In the aftermath, the Tudeh Party, already viewed with deep suspicion as a pro-Soviet force, was officially banned. Its offices were seized, its assets confiscated. Around 200 of its leaders were arrested in a sweeping crackdown. Press censorship tightened immediately. Left-wing newspapers were shut down. Nationalist publications were restricted. Martial law regulations expanded. But that was not all. After reclaiming Azerbaijan and surviving the assassination attempt, the Shah's popularity rose. He had public sympathy. He had political capital. If he ever wanted to shape Iran in his own image, this was the moment. When Mohammad Reza first came to power, he had inherited a country in crisis, foreign troops on its soil, political chaos, economic hardship. To survive, he had leaned on institutions: the Majlis, the press, political parties. He needed them to steady the throne. But deep down, he shared his father's instinct. He believed Iran needed a firm hand to drag it into modernity. That endless debates in parliaments, party rivalries, and public criticism were slowing the country down, holding it back. Now, with his position strengthened, he began taking back the authority he had once allowed others to exercise. In Book 1, we talked about Iran's constitutional revolution. The revolution of 1906 was a sweeping popular movement that forced the Qajar monarchy to accept limits on its power. After months of unrest and protest, Mozaffar al-Din Shah signed the decree establishing a constitutional system and creating the Majlis as a national parliament. But there was a catch. The original constitution document had envisioned more than just one chamber. It had called for a bicameral legislature, an elected Majlis, and a Senate of 60 members. 30 senators would be appointed by the Shah. 30 would be elected. And any legislation would require approval from both chambers to get passed as law. On paper, it created balance, popular representation alongside royal authority. In practice, it was too ambitious for a country just beginning its experiment with parliamentary rule. So, the Senate was never formed. After Mozaffar al-Din Shah died in 1907, the effort faded. Governments postponed it. Constitutionalists opposed it, fearing it would become a tool of aristocratic and monarchical control. Through the rest of the Qajar period, and even under Reza Shah, the Senate remained dormant. Now, the young king saw that long-ignored constitutional clause as something else entirely. Not a balance, a lever. To him, the Senate was a missing piece, the mechanism that would allow him to rise above parliamentary friction and steer the country without obstruction. Riding the wave of his renewed popularity, the Shah called for a constituent assembly to amend the constitution and finally activate the dormant provision. The upper house would be created at last, a Senate to complement the Majlis. But this Senate would not be neutral. Half of its members would be appointed directly by the royal court. And through that half, the Shah would hold decisive influence over legislation. At the same time, he secured for himself the authority to dissolve the Majlis whenever necessary. He also shortened its term from 4 years to 2, a move that weakened the lower chamber and strengthened the crown. But the most important change he made was changing the way prime ministers were appointed. Under the constitution, the Majlis chose the prime minister, and the Shah gave his assent. Now, the system would work the other way, with the Shah choosing and the Majlis voting afterward to confirm or reject his nominee. All of this was a careful consolidation. Legal, procedural, wrapped in constitutional language, but unmistakably a power grab. And as Mohammad Reza Shah tightened his grip at home, he prepared to step onto the world stage. For his first major international visit as king, he chose the United States. Ever since the Tehran Conference, the relationship between the United States and Iran had been steadily growing. In Episode 1, we talked about how Franklin D. Roosevelt saw Iran almost as a social laboratory, a place where modernization and reform could be tested and proven. He believed that just as the New Deal had stabilized America, similar missions could bring political, social, and economic stability to Iran. That belief soon turned into action. The Americans sent military advisors, agricultural experts, engineers, specialists to help with food supply and infrastructure. And then, they sent back a familiar face. You might remember Arthur Mills-Powell from our previous season. Arthur Mills-Powell was a U.S. State Department advisor who first arrived in Iran in July 1922, hired by the Majlis to reorganize the country's finances. At the time, Iran was facing deep budget shortfalls and weak revenue collection. So Parliament gave him unusually broad authority. No spending decision could move forward without his approval. Mills-Powell introduced more systematic tax policies, drafted clear annual budgets, and worked to remove long-standing exemptions that had drained state revenue. For a time, government finances became more structured and less chaotic. But when Reza Shah consolidated power, that balance shifted. A major conflict emerged over military spending. The Shah wanted most of oil revenues funneled into expanding the army. Mills-Powell warned that pouring resources into the military would strain the country's finances in the long run. Eventually, Mills-Powell resigned and left Iran, becoming the second American financial advisor whose mission had ended prematurely, after William Morgan Schuster. Then came 1941. After the Anglo-Soviet occupation, Iran was facing inflation, food shortages, and a weakened state. The old financial order had unraveled again. And because Mills-Powell's earlier work had been seen as effective, and because ties with Washington were growing stronger, he was invited back. Arthur Mills-Powell arrived in early 1943 as Director General of Finance, armed with wide authority as part of the American advisory mission sent to stabilize wartime Iran. The government handed him sweeping powers over the Ministry of Finance, control of the budget, taxation, and major expenditures. For a time, he was even granted temporary legislative authority in financial matters, allowing some reforms to move forward without the usual parliamentary resistance. His objectives were familiar: balance the budget, strengthen tax collection, cut waste, centralize control. Once again, he targeted what he viewed as excessive military spending and tried to impose stricter accounting standards on a bureaucracy he considered inefficient and corrupt. With wartime inflation and grain shortages spreading across the country, he also became involved in food supply management and efforts to curb the black market. Mills-Powell believed that with Reza Shah gone and Iran eager to rebuild, the second mission would be smoother than the first. He was wrong. This time, the conditions were even harsher. The country was occupied. Transport routes were largely controlled by Allied forces. In the north, Soviet authorities obstructed grain shipments, worsening shortages. Cabinets rose and fell quickly. The Majlis was divided. Deputies resisted reforms that threatened entrenched interests. And then came the familiar clash. Just like his father, Mohammad Reza Shah disagreed with Milspow over military spending. A confrontation that carried an almost uncomfortable sense of déjà vu. As months passed, resistance grew. Iranian politicians pushed back. Bureaucrats slowed implementation. Even Washington became cautious. The United States wanted stability in its relationship with Tehran, and Milspow's open friction with the Shah complicated that goal. By 1945, his position was no longer sustainable. His reforms had failed to produce lasting financial stability, and he resigned once again, leaving Iran frustrated and disappointed for the second time. Yet his departure did not damage the broader relationship between the two countries. In December 1949, as Mohammad Reza prepared for his trip to Washington, relations between Iran and the United States stood on solid ground. In less than a decade, two unlikely partners had drawn closer through war, occupation, reform missions, and shared political interests. What had begun as cautious cooperation had grown into something more strategic. Now the Shah wanted to take that relationship a step further. Mohammad Reza wanted to leverage this relationship and ask the U.S. to invest in his grand ambitions. He was going to ask the United States for the very thing Arthur Milspow had repeatedly warned against.
Next day, Mr. Truman goes to the National Airport to welcome His Imperial Majesty Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, Shah of Iran. He's the first Oriental potentate ever to come to America on a state visit, and Washington turns on its warmest charm. Here for a month, the 30-year-old ruler, whose oil-rich country borders on Russia, is expected to ask U.S. arms against threats of Soviet aggression.
The United States' agenda was clear. They believed economic development was the strongest shield against communism. Poverty, corruption, literacy, these were the cracks Moscow could exploit. Strengthen the economy, raise living standards, build institutions, and communism would lose its appeal. They knew the Shah was becoming more authoritarian, but it was not their priority. Stability mattered more. As long as Iran did not tilt toward the Soviet sphere, Washington was willing to tolerate a firm hand in Tehran. First development. Democracy could wait. But the Shah had something else in mind. For him, factories and literacy campaigns were not the true deterrent. Armies were. He wanted a larger military aid package, more funding, more advanced weapons, a stronger army that could stand as both shield and sword. During his stay, officials repeatedly tried to redirect the young monarch's focus. They argued that the greatest danger to his throne was not Soviet tanks crossing the northern border, but a weaker force already at work inside his own country: poverty and uneven development. Inside the Pentagon, generals explained that Iran's military simply did not have the infrastructure, training, or capacity to absorb the sophisticated weapons the Shah was requesting. Advanced arms required advanced systems, logistics, maintenance, industrial support. These could not be improvised. At the State Department, Secretary of State Dean Acheson delivered a more measured warning. The free world, he said, could not match the Soviet Union weapon for weapon without destroying its own economic foundation. If nations diverted all resources to military expansion, they would weaken themselves so thoroughly that collapse would come even without invasion. The Shah listened carefully. He nodded. He spoke about reform, about economic modernization, about fighting corruption. But his mind did not change. For Mohammad Reza, economic development was a long-term horizon. The Soviet Union was immediate. And more than that, just like his father, he saw the military not just as national defense, but as domestic leverage. An instrument of control, a counterweight to rivals, a guarantee of survival. On December 30th, 1949, as the Shah departed the United States, a joint statement was released in Washington. The visit, it said, had taken place in an atmosphere of frankness and cordiality. Relations had been strengthened still further. During his stay, Mohammad Reza had held several days of talks with President Truman and senior officials. He toured factories, farms, and military installations across the country, observing techniques that might be applied in Iran. He met industrialists, educators, and civic leaders, a curated glimpse of American power and productivity. Publicly, the emphasis was clear: economic development. Washington praised Iran's 7-year plan and signaled support for loans, technical assistance, and increased private investment. But alongside those promises stood another commitment. The United States confirmed it was prepared to provide military assistance to help Iran develop its self-defense, a balancing act of development and defense. For Washington, prosperity was a shield against communism. For the Shah, the shield came first. Mohammad Reza was ambitious, but the circumstances of his rise had made him deeply insecure. He had come to power when foreign armies forced his father to abdicate. He had seen how quickly a throne could disappear, how easily a king could be removed. He did not want political parties undermining him. He would not allow constitutional institutions to limit him. And he refused to accept a military too weak to protect him. Lack of control was Mohammad Reza Shah's greatest fear. So he reached for more of it. But there was one man who had seen this pattern before: Ahmed Kavam, 5 times prime minister, a survivor of dynasty, a negotiator who had stared down the Soviets in 1946 and secured their withdrawal from Azerbaijan when Iran's territorial integrity hung in the balance. When the Shah moved in 1949 to revise the constitution, to revive the long-dormant Senate, to secure the authority to dissolve the Majlis and to expand his power, Kavam understood exactly what was happening. From exile, he issued a warning. Every new authority the Shah claimed, Kavam argued, would bring with it a new burden. The more power concentrated in the monarch's hands, the more responsibility would rest there too. When economic hardship struck, when political unrest surfaced, when public anger grew, there would be no parliament to blame, no rival prime minister to sacrifice. Many in Iran and abroad had already seen how paranoia and unchecked authority had led to one king's downfall. The only person refusing to see the pattern was the new king himself. The Lion and the Sun is a String Studios production. For more about this episode, including the transcript, relevant photos, and documents, visit our website. If you're new to our show, you can catch up with all previous chapters on our podcast feed or read the transcripts on our website. Book 1 explored the constitutional revolution of Iran and the fall of the Qajar dynasty, and Book 2 is about the formation of the Pahlavi dynasty and life of Reza Shah. If you like this episode and our show so far, don't forget to rate the podcast and leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us from. For early access to episodes and bonus content, consider joining us on Patreon. It's a great way to support the show and get something extra in return. My name is Oriana, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.